It's been said that there's strength in numbers. Have you ever really thought about what that statement means? I thought about it for a few minutes on Monday afternoon as I was finishing this up. I thought, strength in numbers. Of course that means you're stronger when there's more of you. But what else does it mean? Could it mean that you're better off when there's more of you? Could it mean that you're greater when there's more of you? Could it mean that you're tougher when there's more of you? Maybe it means you're just more courageous when you're not facing something all alone. You see, it is so much easier to do something when there's someone alongside of you. When you aren't alone. When you know that you belong. When you know that there are other people standing for the things that you stand for, it makes it easier to take a stand. And all of this makes it easier to be new. It kind of takes the scary away from being new. Last week, I challenged you to consider being the best version of yourself that you could, starting out with a new you in this new year. And we talked about what we would do if we had the opportunity to be new. If you had the chance to start over and be the best version of yourself. This week, I want all of us to begin to consider what keeps us from really starting over. What keeps us from becoming something new? You see, one of the scariest things about being new, whether you are new to a situation, or new to a place, or just starting over and making some new decisions, one of the scariest things about being new is being alone in the process. Go on, if we're really honest with ourselves, no one likes to feel alone. No one likes to feel like they don't belong or they're being left out. I don't see anybody raising their hand saying, yes, I want to face this challenge by myself. Most all of us feel stronger when others are around us. And this fear of being alone, this fear of being left out, can drive us to do some pretty stupid stuff. I want you to think about the thing that you've gotten in the most trouble for, or the one thing that you regret most in your life up to this point. Okay? And all of us, myself included, would probably say that it was because I didn't want to be alone that I did it. Or I was just trying to fit in.
Oh.
Because our desire to fit in drives us to do some pretty stupid stuff sometimes. You know the famous last words of every redneck. Hey, y'all, watch this.
That gives me an idea.
If you've said things like that, you probably can think about something in your mind that you did because you were surrounded by a bunch of people that thought it was a really cool idea at the moment. You see, we do crazy things when we feel like that if we don't, we're going to be left out. We make crazy decisions when we feel like that if we don't make that decision, we're going to get excluded or we're going to get left alone. Because if we're really honest with ourselves, deep down inside, we all want a place to belong. We all want a group to be a part of, a place to fit in. And I would dare say that the one reason so many people don't become a better version of themselves is because they are afraid of being alone once they actually decide to make that change. They're afraid of being out on an island all by themselves. They're afraid of not having anyone with them, of no one understanding the decision. It is so much easier to be new when you have somebody that comes alongside of you. And I want you to, we're going to be in the book of Daniel again tonight. We're going to keep looking at Daniel. I told you last week it's a 3-week journey into the life of Daniel and his friends. Daniel chapter 2 is where we're going to be. And we're going to start with verse 1. We're just going to look at the first 13 verses here. Then we'll come back and look at a few more in a second. But we're going to see how Daniel and his friends became much easier at being new and much more courageous at being new because they knew they weren't facing it by themselves. Daniel chapter 2, verse 1.
Okay.
On the screen behind me, probably.
Oh, now it is.
Beginning with verse 1. One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such a disturbing dream that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, Long live the king! Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. But the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. They said again, Please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. The king replied, I know what you are doing. You're stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say that if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, No one on earth can tell the king his dream, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they don't live here among people. The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. So I want to review for a second. I want to kind of go back and start out where we were last week for a minute, because some of you weren't here last week, and I want to help you kind of figure out what's going on with Daniel. Daniel is a teenage Hebrew boy from Jerusalem. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar invades Daniel's homeland. God allows Jerusalem to be invaded and destroyed because God's people really weren't doing a good job of being God's people. You know, the people that lived in Jerusalem, they were supposed to be an example for the rest of the world. But the truth is, if you remember, they had turned their backs on God, and they were worshiping false gods, and they were doing all kinds of wicked things and horrible things. If you could think of a sin, they were doing it. And finally, God just says, you know, I've told you to clean up your act over and over and over, and I've had enough. So now I'm going to let the Babylonians invade you and destroy everything you have. So he allowed his people to be invaded, killed, and captured, and taken into slavery. Now Babylon had this policy of taking the best and the brightest children of any kingdom that they invaded and conquered as hostages and slaves, and brainwashing them into their culture and a way of life. Now Daniel, he was probably between 14 and 17 years old when he was marched halfway across the world to serve a king who had just destroyed his home city, his hometown, murdered most of his people, probably including his parents. And in the middle of all this, Daniel had to make a choice. And if you remember last week, it seemed like a pretty insignificant choice. It was a choice not to eat food offered up to idols. But that put a mark on him. He chose to be different. He chose to be the version of himself that he should be, instead of the version of himself that everybody else expected him to be. And Daniel took a stand against something that he knew wasn't right, and because he did, 3 other guys decided to stand with him. You remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And after 3 years of training, the 4 emerged at the top of the class of hundreds of students from all over the world. Now I want you to know that Nebuchadnezzar's empire stretched from modern-day Egypt into what is now parts of China and India, and as far north as modern-day Russia and Turkey. So if you were trying to picture this in your mind, Nebuchadnezzar's empire was pretty much the entire continent of Asia and a large section of the Middle East. And these 4 young men now find themselves working jobs in the king's service. And that's where we pick up the story in Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar wakes up after having a horrible dream. You ever had one of those dreams that's just so bad it scares you awake? And then you wake up and you can't remember what the dream was about or why you were scared? See, that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He has this horrible dream and he wakes up terrified by what he had just dreamed. But he couldn't remember what had happened. So the king, he's upset because he has no idea. But he has no idea what's upsetting. So he calls in his magicians and his enchanters and sorcerers and astrologers and all these folks who are supposed to be in touch with the supernatural world, and he demands that they explain this horrible dream to him. He says, I don't know what I dreamed. You need to tell me what I dreamed, and then you need to explain to me why it was such a scary dream. And all these so-called experts look at Nebuchadnezzar and say, we would be glad to interpret your dream, but there's no way that we can tell you what it means unless you tell us what it was about. Now, I just want to go on record as saying that's probably not the best answer to give the world's most powerful leader at the time when he's had a bad dream, okay? And he's already upset. I think if I'm those wise men, I'm finding some other answer to give him at this point in time. The king threatens them with their lives, their family lives. I'm going to rip you from limb to limb and leave your houses in rubble. I'm going to destroy everything about you. And they beg for more time, or even just a clue as to what the king's dream was about. And he just gets angrier. Says, you're just stalling for time. You're trying to lie to get my mind off this. And instead he orders the execution of every wise man in Babylon. Now you talk about making bad decisions when you're angry. There's a bad decision when you're angry. Now we continue on with the story in verse 14. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. So here we've got the king's commander showing up on Daniel's doorstep. Daniel's unaware of everything that's just happened in the king's palace. He doesn't know that the king's had a bad dream. He doesn't know that the king's not getting the answers he wants. So he's very surprised when the commander of the king's guard shows up and says, here's this decree that I need to kill all the wise men, so step out of here so I can execute you. Now, to me, it seems incredibly brave of Daniel. He asks, can you tell me why the king made this decision? And the commander explains it all to him, and Daniel immediately leaves for the king and for his palace. And he gets in front of King Nebuchadnezzar and he asks, I need some time and I might be able to interpret your dream. Now to me that's a pretty brave statement for Daniel, okay? Daniel goes so far as to look at the king and he says, you know what? No one called me when you asked for your magicians, your enchanters, your sorcerers, your astrologers, because I'm not any of them. But I think I can tell you what your dream is and what it's about. If you give me one night. And I'll tell you what, if I can't interpret it by tomorrow morning, you can kill everyone just like you were going to. No harm, no foul. So we see Daniel in another tough situation right here. If he doesn't interpret the dream correctly, a dream no one else, including the person who had the dream, can interpret, his life is over in a few hours. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Daniel, I would go home and start packing a bag. I would use the night to get a head start on whoever's coming to kill me the next day, okay? I would get out of Dodge as quick as I could. What does Daniel do? He goes home and he finds his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he fills them in with what's happened. And all 4 of them drop to their knees and get to praying. All 4 of them start going before God, asking God to provide them with what this dream was about and to help them interpret this dream. And in the middle of the night, God answers their prayer and gives Daniel the answer he's looking for. And everyone's lives are spared. The story turns out well. Much better than it probably could have. Because Daniel, who has decided last week to start as a new creation, is now willing to take a stand for something that nobody else really wants to. Daniel knew he wasn't alone. And no doubt, knowing that he had friends standing with him, made it so much easier for him to approach the king and act as courageously as he did. Knowing that he had guys, friends around him, that would support him and encourage him. You see, having people that stand with us when we're trying to be something new gives us all strength and courage to move forward with the necessary changes we have to make in our lives. It's so much easier to be someone new when there's someone alongside of you, cheering you on and encouraging you. When you know you're not alone, when you know that you belong, when you know that there are people standing for the things that you stand for, being new is really not as scary as it once was. So I want you to think, what would it look like for you to decide to stand with someone else? What would it look like for you to go to somebody and say, you know what? I'm wanting to start new this year. Will you start new with me? Can we encourage each other and cheer each other on? What would you have the courage to do if you knew you weren't alone? If you knew you had a group of friends standing around you praying for you and cheering you on? You see, in this room are people that you go to school with. Now, we have a very diverse youth group, and there are probably very few of us. I mean, we go to several middle schools and high schools. But just about everybody in this room has somebody they go to school with. People that can stand with you. People that can encourage you. Last week you were asked, what would you do if you were new? This week, I want you to think about this question in your small groups. Who do you have that will be new with you? Who do you know that'll stand with you to keep you from standing alone? Maybe it's you can go to somebody else and offer to be that person for them. Let's pray, guys. Father, I thank you so much for tonight, God. I thank you for your word, the lives of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they inspire us. Father, I pray that you help all of us begin even now to think about what we could do if we stood together, if we encouraged each other, built each other up, if we prayed for each other, if we stood alongside each other. We love you. Amen. Okay.